The U.S. government can't go bankrupt because we can print our own money.
It obviously begs the question, why exactly are we borrowing in a currency that we print ourselves? I'm waiting for someone to stand up and say, why do we borrow our own currency in the first place?
Like you said, they print the dollar. So why does the government even borrow?
Well, again, some of this stuff gets, some of the language that some of the language and concepts are just confusing. I mean, the government definitely prints money, and it definitely lends that money, which is why the government definitely prints money, and then it lends that money by selling bonds. Is that what they do? They sell bonds. Yeah, they sell bonds, right? Because they sell bonds and people buy the bonds and lend them the money. Yeah. So a lot of times, at least to my ear with MMT, the language and the concepts can be kind of unnecessarily confusing, but there is no question that the government prints money and then it uses that money to I guess I can't really talk. I don't get it. I don't know what they're talking about. Like, because it's like the government clearly prints money. It does it all the time, and it clearly borrows. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this debt and deficit conversation. So I don't think there's anything confusing there.
The economic advisor to the President of the United States, caught hesitating over a fundamental question. If the government creates its own currency, why does it issue debt? That moment isn't a mistake. It's a crack in the surface, because the system itself is unusual. If a government can print its own money, why does it borrow it? If it cannot run out of dollars, why does it pay interest? And if bankruptcy isn't the real threat, what is? Let's begin with something important. The United States cannot involuntarily run out of dollars. It issues the dollar. Its central bank can create reserves digitally. It does not operate like a household. It does not need to earn money before it spends. So technically, yes, it cannot go broke in its own currency. But that statement hides something deeper. Governments do not borrow because they lack money. They borrow because debt creates structure. The government issues bonds. Investors buy those bonds. Those bonds become assets for banks, pension funds, insurance companies, and foreign central banks. Bond markets determine interest rates. Interest rates influence everything: mortgage rates, corporate borrowing, investment decisions, currency strength. When confidence in a government weakens, bond yields rise. When bond yields rise, borrowing becomes more expensive. When borrowing becomes expensive, political pressure builds. Debt does not simply finance government, it disciplines it. Without debt markets, governments would answer only to inflation. With debt markets, they answer to capital. Capital reacts instantly. Capital withdraws instantly. Capital punishes instantly. That is not incompetence. That is architecture. Now zoom in. Your life is structured around debt: mortgage, student loans, car finance, credit cards. Miss payments and you lose assets. Debt ties you to income. Income ties you to employment. Employment ties you to economic stability. Debt ensures participation. You do not need force to maintain order. You need repayment schedules. Debt becomes behavioral control without visible enforcement. But the deeper mechanism lies in interest. Debt carries interest. Interest requires repayment beyond the original amount. For the system to remain stable, total income must grow over time. Growth is not optional. It is required. If growth slows, defaults rise. If defaults rise, banks restrict lending. If lending contracts, liquidity tightens. When liquidity tightens, recession begins. So policymakers intervene. They cut interest rates. They expand central bank balance sheets. They inject liquidity. They increase debt to prevent contraction. Debt prevents collapse. But it also deepens dependency. The system does not collapse under debt. It runs on expansion. Now ask a harder question. Who benefits most from this structure? After the financial crisis of 2008, central banks created trillions of dollars. Interest rates were pushed to historic lows. Liquidity flooded financial markets. Asset prices surged. Stock markets climbed. Real estate soared. Corporate valuations expanded. But wages did not rise at the same pace. Savings accounts earned almost nothing. Those who owned assets saw their wealth multiply. Those who relied primarily on wages saw costs increase. New money enters through financial institutions first. Those closest to the source benefit first. By the time it reaches everyday earners, prices have already adjusted. Money creation is not neutral. It amplifies capital. And capital compounds. Cheap credit allows corporations to borrow at scale. Corporations buy back their own stock. Executive compensation rises. Asset holders grow wealthier. Meanwhile, housing becomes less affordable. The cost of living rises. Households take on more debt to maintain the same standard of living. Debt becomes both the solution and the trap. Now zoom out again. The United States issues the world's reserve currency. Global trade is priced in dollars. Energy markets are priced in dollars. Central banks hold U.S. Treasury bonds as reserves. When the United States runs deficits, the world absorbs its debt. When it expands its money supply, global liquidity expands. Other countries do not have this privilege. If emerging economies borrow heavily in foreign currencies, they expose themselves to currency risk. If their currency weakens, their debt burden increases. If investors lose confidence, capital exits. When capital exits, crisis follows. In those moments, assistance arrives. Loans are offered. Conditions are attached. Policy adjustments are required. Debt becomes leverage. Leverage shapes domestic policy. Domestic policy influences political outcomes. Not conspiracy, hierarchy. When officials say, "We can't go bankrupt," they are speaking about solvency. But solvency is not the real constraint. Credibility is. Governments do not run out of money. They run out of trust. When trust erodes, bond yields rise. When bond yields rise, borrowing costs surge. When borrowing costs surge, instability spreads. Debt markets enforce credibility. Credibility enforces discipline. Discipline shapes policy. Policy shapes society. So the question is not whether governments can print money. They can. The question is who absorbs the consequences of printing? Who benefits from liquidity? Who bears the cost of inflation? Who carries the burden when growth slows? Debt is not simply an economic instrument. It is a structural mechanism. It disciplines citizens. It disciplines governments. It amplifies inequality. It underpins global dominance. And because it is embedded in the architecture of modern finance, removing it would destabilize everything built upon it. Banks rely on government bonds as collateral. Derivatives rely on interest rate benchmarks. Pension funds rely on fixed income returns. Global trade relies on stable reserve assets. Remove debt markets overnight, and the entire system fractures. So debt persists, not because it is accidental, but because it is foundational. The system is not broken. It is functioning exactly as designed. The real question isn't whether the world could erase its debt. The real question is, what would replace it? And who would lose power if it did?